ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So last couple of times we've gone through the introduction of Vedartha Sangraha, and now we're going to actually start the text of Vedartha Sangraha by Sri Ramanuja. The translation is by Raj Gopal Iyengar in 1956. And let's have a look. Vedartha Sangraha by Sri Ramanuja. I offer my adoration to Vishnu, on whom depend all things without exception, sentient as well as non-sentient. Vishnu, who reclines on the serpent Shesha, and who is free from all imperfections, and is likewise the treasure house of all auspicious qualities. There's the note here by the author of the translation. In this Mangala Sloka means an auspicious, sometimes it's called a Mangala Charanam, or when Sanskrit authors write some sort of book or a text, they usually start out with a verse of praise or a verse of an auspicious verse. So Mangala Sloka means an auspicious verse. In this auspicious sloka or verse, right, Mangala Sloka, Sri Ramanuja offers his obeisance to his Ishta Devata. Ishta Devata is the particular form of God that one desires. When one thinks of God, one thinks of that particular form. So there are maybe many forms of God and even many forms of Lord Vishnu. And Ramanuja has spoken about his form that he is meditating on. So in this Mangala Sloka, Sri Ramanuja offers his obeisance to his Ishta Devata, and at the same time, implicitly and explicitly states briefly some of the doctrines of his philosophical system by stating that all things sentient and non-sentient depend upon Vishnu. He refers to what is called Vishnu's Lila Vibhuti. Lila Vibhuti means this material world, this material universe, as distinguished from Sri Vaikuntham, which is called Nitya Vibhuti, the other world, the actual world of Vishnu. So, namely, this world of ours, with all its variety, which exists for his play or sport. That's why it's called Leela. The word Leela means play or sport. So it's like a play that's on a stage. It's like for his play. By saying that Vishnu reclines on the serpent Shesha, or Ananta Shesha, he hints at the region of eternal glory, that is Sri Vaikuntham, which is Vishnu's Nitya Vibhuti, or eternal glory. As against the Advaitins, right, the followers of Adi Shankaracharya, the monists, otherwise known as Mayavadis by some, who hold that Brahman, the Supreme, is without attributes and differentiating features, Beda means difference. Ramanuja states that Vishnu, who is Brahman, the Supreme Brahman, has attributes which are innumerable and inauspicious. Ananta, Kalyana, gunas is the way we say that in Sanskrit. Ananta means unlimited or infinite. Kalyana means auspicious, and gunas means qualities or attributes. By the words Ashesha Chit Achit, Ashesha Chit Achit, all sentient and non-sentient things, the author also hints at the existence of many souls and not a single self or Atman as the Advaitins hold. There are some Advaitins who hold that there is only a single Atman or a single Jivatman, a single soul. But Ramanuja believes that there are multiple souls. That idea of the Advaitins, of one group of Advaitins, is called Eka Jivavad, one soul, that there's only one soul. They hold Vastu as, Vastu means a thing, which the word vastu, we don't see the Sanskrit here, so we're not seeing all these Sanskrit words. But anyway, the word vastu, which actually means a thing, right? Which ashesha chit achit qualifies, hints at sentient and non-sentient things being real and not illusory, as Shankara maintains. By offering his adoration, it may also be inferred that Ramanuja suggests to us the means of attaining Brahman, In other words, he's suggesting by offering his adoration or his praise or his obeisance, his respects to the Supreme Vishnu, the Supreme Brahman, right? He's suggesting that we also do that, and that is the method of attaining moksha or attaining perfection, liberation. Sanskrit critics have laid down a rule that the introductory sloka or verse, or Mangala sloka, or auspicious verse, otherwise known as Mangala Charanam sometimes, should give the gist. It should give the gist of the book briefly, or at least hint at it. So the introductory slokas of all Sanskrit books are supposed to give in very brief form, right? It's supposed to give a hint about the contents. Okay, so that was verse 1. Verse 2, preeminent shines the sage Yamuna, right? So he's referring to Yamunacharya, otherwise known in Tamil as Alavandar, who was his Param Guru, who was the guru of his initiating spiritual master, Mahapurna or Perinambi, and who wanted to initiate Ramanuja, but unfortunately passed away before he had a chance to actually formally initiate Ramanuja into the Sri Vaishnava cult. So preeminent shines the sage Yamuna, by whom was dispelled the darkness of delusion. Number 1, which maintained that Brahman was subject to ignorance or avidya and fell into bondage of births and deaths, samsara, the repeated cycle of birth and death. And 2, the delusion which held that Brahman became helpless owing to its connection with adjuncts other than itself, para upadi, and likewise to the delusion that Brahman is the seat of imperfections owing to its evolution into the sentient and non-sentient world. So he's giving a hint here because he's explained, first of all, that Shankara's philosophy, the Advaita Vedanta, says this first thing, that through Brahman, or the Supreme being somehow covered by Maya or illusion, here known as avidya or ignorance, becomes conditioned and becomes part of this world of samsara, birth, death, disease, and old age. That's what the Advaitins say. And then further on, the Beda Vedans, right, such as Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash, and specifically Yadava Prakash here, who was Ramanuja's Gurukul teacher when he was a child, but who he gave up because he disagreed with his philosophy. So Yadava Prakash has this idea of upadis, which are false designations which we come to think of as real, like this body and the mind and etc. Right? And he's talking about in the second one, the delusion which is held that Brahman becomes helpless owing to its connection with these adjuncts or adjuncts other than itself, para upadis, right? And likewise, the third thing, to the delusion that Brahman is the seat of imperfections owing to its evolution into the sentient and non-sentient world. Okay, so a note on the second verse or the second sloka. In the second sloka, Ramanuja pays his homage to his great guru, his grand guru, his Param Guru, right? Yamunacharya, otherwise known as Alavanda, who by his treatises, Atma Siddhi, Samvit Siddhi, and Ishvara Siddhi, Vedartha Sangraha, and the like, there are some other things that he wrote, but these are the main philosophical books of Alavanda or Yamunacharya are the 3 siddhis, city, otherwise known as Siddhi Traya, which are Atma Siddhi, Samvit Siddhi, and Ishvara Siddhi, which deal with Chit, Atma, Achit, Samvit, and Ishvara, or otherwise the soul, the material universe of matter, and Ishvara, God, which are the three tattvas, or the three principles, which are described in Vedanta philosophy. So he's spoken about those. The word siddhi means the perfection of understanding these things. And Vedartha, Sangraha, which is about the meaning of the Gita brought together into a condensed form, which is his book of 32 verses, which explains the meaning of Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Gita from the Mahabharata, and the like. So he wrote some other things. Specifically, we can say Stotra Ratna, which is the jewel of all stotras, Stotra Ratna, about in praise of the Lord, which has a lot of philosophical meaning, which also includes the ideas of property as well as bhakti, and then Chatushloki, which is about the goddess Mahalakshmi, who is very important as a Purushakara, as a mediatrix in Sri Vaishnava theology. And the like, refuted the doctrines of rival systems like Advaita by showing that they were against the Shrutis, meaning the Vedas, the Upanishads, and against also reason. So they were illogical, irrational, as well as being against the scriptures. So in one, the illusion of the Advaitins is explained. So above, as I said, the first part, he explains the illusion of the Advaitins. And in two, it is that of Bhaskara, the exponent of the Beda. And in three, Ramanuja refers to the view of Yadava Prakash, who favored another school of Beda. So these two different forms of Beda. So these are the three main philosophies that Ramanuja objects to in the second sloka here, as well as paying respects to his teacher, Yamunacharya. This is the gist of the Upanishads, whose aim is to impart distinctive knowledge to what is good, of what is good to the whole world. Okay, meditation, adoration, obeisance, etc., to the 2 feet of the Supreme Being, done with intense love, are the means of attaining him when they are accompanied by the performance of the duties of one's varna, caste, and ashrama stage of life, and preceded by a knowledge of the real nature of the jiva and of the individual soul and the Supreme Being. He who is in the soul and within the soul, who's in the soul and within the soul, whom the soul is not aware of, he whose body is the soul, that is, of the jiva, who controls the soul, that spirit is the inner ruler, immortal. And that's a quote from Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 5.7.22. Another quote, this being is the innermost soul of all beings, free from all imperfections, resplendent, the same everywhere. He is Narayana. And that's from Subala Upanishad 7. The seers of Brahman long to know him with the help of the Vedic texts by the performance of sacrifice, yajna, in accordance with varna and ashrama, by charitable gifts, by tapas, meditation, and by freedom from desires. This is Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, again, 6.4.22. So here we have some, and the words varna and ashrama describe the different positions in society that a person is born into, like that, varna and ashrama. So different classes of people and different stages of their lives. So he who knows Brahman attains the supreme, and this is from Taittiriya Upanishad. Note, according to Ramanuja, the word knows or Veda here means adores, right? So it should not just mean here in the Taittiriya Upanishad that when we see he who knows Brahman attains the supreme, meaning that if we know about the philosophy of the Supreme, then we know the Supreme. But Ramanuja indicates that it also means to adore or to love or to worship the Supreme. So he who knows him in this manner becomes immortal, free from bonds. There is no other way of attaining. And this is from the Purusha Sukta, which comes in the Rig Veda, actually comes in all the Vedas. And there are other texts like it. So note again, knows here means worship or adores. So see the previous note also. So the soul of the jiva, inside the soul of the soul, is its real nature, has none of the varied differences arising from the specific modifications of prakriti or matter, such as gods and men, and has knowledge and bliss alone as its attributes. When the difference, such as exists between gods, men, when it says gods here with small g, it means the devatas like Shiva and Brahma, right? Men and the like, arising from karma has been destroyed. When the difference, right? What is the difference? The difference is only material. The souls are the same, right? The jivatman is the same. So the difference is the mind-body complex, which the soul inhabits in this material world. So when the difference such as exists between gods, men, and the like arising from karma, our past deeds, right? The reactions to our past deeds is destroyed. Difference between one soul, jiva, and another is not capable of being expressed in words and can only be felt by themselves. Only this much can be said of the soul, that it is of the nature of knowledge or consciousness. This is true of all souls. So this is also spoken about in Bhagavad Gita, Brahmani Kavihastini, Sunicheva Swapakecha, Pandita Samadarshanaha. A person in true knowledge sees that all the souls are the same. The soul within an elephant, the soul within a Chandala, a Brahman, any type of person, or any animal or any plant, any sentient being. The Jivatman is the same. And they're all of the nature of knowledge or consciousness. The inner ruler, immortal, is Bhagavan Narayana, who as Purushottama means the greatest person, is different from all else. He is the sole cause of the origin, continuance, and dissolution of the universe of sentient and non-sentient things described above, as also of granting release from samsara. His nature is different from that of all things other than himself by virtue of his being at variance with all imperfections and by virtue of his being the home of infinite bliss. He possesses hosts of infinite and countless auspicious qualities. He's referred to in all the Upanishads as, in varied terms, like Sarvatma, the universal soul, Para Brahman, the supreme Brahman, Para Jyotish, the supreme light or splendor, Para Tattva, the supreme truth, Paramatma, the supreme spirit, and Sat, reality. In their attempt to explain his greatness, the Shrutis or Vedantic texts, the Upanishads, refer to the world in phrases like Tat Shakti or Tat Shakti with the Sandhi there, his power, Tadamsa, a fragment or portion of his, Tad Vibhuti, his magnificence, Tad Rupa, his form, Tat Sharira, right, which is Tat Sharira, becomes Tat Sharira with Sandhi, his body, Tat Tanu, his body, and so also by coordinating him with the world, because he controls it by being the innermost soul of all things, sentient and non-sentient. So Ramanuja is beginning to explain his idea about the shariri bhava, the idea that we can understand that the Lord is not only the inner controller, but also the outer controller of everything, and pervades internally and externally. So a note. Samanadikaranya, when two things are put in grammatical apposition, which means they're put in the same case, two nominatives, two substantives or nouns are put in the same case, right? The same grammatical case. They're known to be in apposition with each other. There is said to be samadhi karanya between them. In the famous Upanishadic text, Tattvamasi, which is translated that thou art, that and thou are in apposition or coordination with each other. When we say Janaka is the king, Janaka and the king are put in coordination with each other. Both Janaka and the king are in the same case grammatically. So they're in apposition. They are nouns in apposition. Two words having different meanings are employed to describe the same object. So it's the same object. The same person is the king and the same person is Janaka. But they're two words and they have two different meanings. Janaka is a personal pronoun, is a personal noun, a proper noun, which means it's his name, the name of a person, and the king represents a description of Janaka, right? Meaning that he is the sovereign of a particular nation, right? Of a nation. Okay, so that and thou are used in coordination or grammatical, in the text that thou art, addressed to Swetaketu, right, by his father, that and thou are used in coordination or grammatical apposition with each other. According to Ramanuja, that refers to the Supreme Being who creates, sustains, and destroys all things. Thou also refers to the Supreme Being, the inner ruler who controls the soul of Swetaketu from within. That thou art. Not meaning that Swetaketu is the Supreme Brahman, but meaning that his inner controller is the Supreme Brahman. The meaning of the text is therefore as follows. The Supreme Being, who is the Lord of the universe, is, O Swetaketu, the inner ruler who is the soul of your soul. Ramanuja argues thus, when we say Swetaketu, we refer not only to the bodily form of Swetaketu, but to the soul of Swetaketu as well. The signification of the term does not stop there. It refers also to the Supreme Being, who is the soul of Swetaketu's soul, and of whom Swetaketu's soul is the body. Shankara, on the other hand, maintains that samanyadikaranya, or appositional use or coordination of words, expresses complete identity, complete soul identity between the two things. That thou art means, according to Shankara, him, the identity of the individual self with the Supreme Spirit. The philosophical systems of Shankara, Advaita, and of Bhaskara and Yadava Prakash, Beda. In their attempt to explain this coordination between Brahman and the self, as also Brahman and the world, as found in Tattvamasi, or that thou art, right, which is said to by the Advaitins to be one of their great sayings from the Upanishads called Mahavakyas, and all this is Brahman, which is another saying, whose purpose is to bring out the greatness of Brahman by stating that he is in all things. Some commentators, right, so Ramanuja is saying here, some commentators maintain the following view. So now Ramanuja is going to give the Purva Paksha, he's going to give the view of some other commentators, meaning Shankara, Bhaskara, and Yadava Prakash, right, the Advaitins and the Beda-Vedans, right, and then he's going to give the Siddhanta. He's already explained a little bit about the Siddhanta, but anyway, he's going to explain here. So this is the view of some commentators. Brahman is pure knowledge or consciousness, devoid of any difference or specific particularity, vishesha, right? Any quality or attribute. Though Brahman is eternally free and self-evident or self-luminous, it is identical with the individual self as understood from the coordination, samanyadikaranyam, contained in the text like that thou art. Brahman itself is in the bondage of samsara, this cycle of birth and death, owing to ignorance or nescience, avidya, and that which obtains release is Brahman. That which obtains release is Brahman. The whole universe, with its endless differences, like Ishvara, God, and the sentient beings, the jivas, and the non-sentient things, matter, material nature, controlled by him, which are other than pure consciousness without difference, are illusory. This is what Shankara said, mithya. Mithya means they are illusion. The distinction that one is in bondage and that another is free from it has no basis. It is also illusory to think that some souls attain salvation or release from bondage before now. Only one body is animated by the soul or self, and that the other bodies are soulless. It is impossible to state which that one body is, right? So all of these are by different commentators have these different ideas. Some people say, look, there's only one soul in one body and all the other bodies don't have souls in them. There's so many different philosophies, so many different ideas like this. So the acharya or preceptor who teaches divine knowledge is also illusory. The Shastra, the scripture, is illusory too. The one who understands the scripture is illusory, right? The person who studies the scripture. And likewise, the knowledge arising from the scripture is also illusory. And all this is understood only from this illusory scripture. All these things that we've just said, all of these doctrines. So note, this is Ramanuja's summing up of Shankara's Advaita and his doctrine of Maya or avidya, ignorance or illusion, and the illusory appearance of this material world of many souls and matter. So here, when it says up here, souls attain salvation or release before. So there's some other people here. There's a note here that when he says here that some other people have some ideas, like Shuka, Prahlad, and Vamadeva. So we don't really know exactly about that. We maybe go into that later and find out exactly what he means by Shuka, Prahlad, and Vamadeva having some other ideas. So now we're going to come to Bhaskara's Beta Beta. Bhaskara was, of course, prior to Yadava Prakash, and he seems to be the first person to present the Beta Beta idea. Beta means difference, and abeta means oneness. So difference and oneness. Others maintain that Brahman, though possessed of all auspicious qualities like freedom from imperfections, should be considered in the light of the text declaring identity between Brahman and the world, or between Brahman and the individual self, as becoming subject to bondage and release owing to its association with some limited adjunct, upadi, right? False designation is another way of thinking of an upadi. And that it is also subject to various modifications of an impure nature. No, this is Ramanuja summing up of Bhaskara's Beta Beta system. Next note, modifications means the changes in matter and the changes into various non-sentient objects, like the evolution of matter in the course of creation. Now let's hear about Yadava Prakash's Beta Beta, which is a little bit different from Bhaskara's Beta Beta. Others still, in explaining the truth of the text, teaching identity, the texts which teach identity, because there are also texts which don't teach identity, which teach difference. So the texts teaching identity or oneness hold that Brahman is the sea of unsurpassed and boundless qualities. It is of such a nature as to become gods, men, animals, dwellers in hell, and in Swarga, heaven, and the souls that have attained release. By nature, he is different as well as not different from them, and is subject to various modifications of an impure nature. So note here, what do the Shrutis mean when they speak of the individual self as being identical with the Supreme Self, or Brahman, and of all things being Brahman? The answer to this question is different in different systems, and it is this answer that gives each system its definite character. According to Shankara, since the individual self is Brahman, shadowed by avidya, right? He calls this covering by Maya or avidya, or ignorance or illusion, adhyasa. The adhyasa is a superimposition of ignorance or illusion onto the Supreme Brahman. So ignorance or nescience. And since this avidya is itself illusory, there is only one reality, namely Brahman, and no other. The individual self, when it realizes its identity with Brahman, becomes Brahman. Brahman is pure chit, or consciousness. It is not conscious of anything else, for there is nothing else that is real. Nothing can be predicted, because remember, when consciousness, the thing about Ramanuja's system is he talks about Dharma Adbhuta Jnana. Dharma Adbhuta Jnana means that something which is consciousness, when something is a knower or a conscious, like God or the soul, right? It can also know other things. But it cannot. In Shankara's philosophy, there's no other things to be known. So normally we'd understand if something is conscious, it's conscious of something, it's conscious of itself. It has to be conscious of other things also, right? So there's knowledge, a knower, and a thing to be known. But that doesn't enter into Advaita Vedanta. So it is not conscious of anything else, but there's nothing else which is real. Nothing can be predicted of this chit, this consciousness, except that it is, or that it is sat, eternal, right? Bhaskara and his followers say that Brahman has attributes or qualities, and that it is not merely indifferent chit, or consciousness. Brahman is possessed of countless auspicious qualities and is not bound by karma. But owing to its association with upadhis, or limiting adjuncts, it is seen as gods, men, animals, plants, etc., and the like. These upadhis are the bodies and the senses of those gods, men, animals, and plants. Brahman changes into gods, men, animals, and plants, and so also into inanimate forms of matter. This explains, according to Bhaskara, the statement of identity in texts like that thou art, and all is indeed Brahman. The upadhis are, in Bhaskara's system, real. Unlike in Shankara's system, where avidya or Maya, ignorance and illusion, are not real. Hence, the individual selves and the world of inanimate objects are real, according to the Beta Vedans. Bhaskara condemns the doctrine of Maya, or avidya, and the theory of the world's illusory appearance. Brahman is, in reality, not different from the individual souls, except for the latter's adventitious association with upadhis. When the upadhis, the limiting adjuncts, disappear in mukti, or liberation, there is no difference at all between Brahman and the individual souls. So basically, Yadava Prakash and Bhaskara, they basically say, look, this world is real, the souls are real, but ultimately they're unreal when they all finish up. They all are Brahman. Brahman is by nature not different from sentient and non-sentient things. The difference between Brahman and non-sentient things is natural, right? Because non-sentient things are not sentient, they have no consciousness, there's no, Now, but the difference between Brahman and the souls seems a little interesting. Maybe we'll talk about that. In the case of sentient things, the difference is due to the adventitious association with upadhis, or limiting adjuncts. Yadav agrees with Bhaskara in describing Brahman as possessed of attributes or qualities. He holds that Brahman is capable of existing as gods, men, animals, and plants, and likewise as non-sentient objects, but by nature, it is both different and non-different from them, right? To Bhaskara, the difference between Brahman and the conscious self is adventitious, being the result of upadhi, limiting adjunct. Essentially, there is no difference between them. In the case of non-sentient objects, the difference is natural and essential. To Yadav Prakash, on the other hand, in the case of both sentient and non-sentient objects, the differences are natural and not adventitious, and so also the non-difference. So the difference and non-difference are essential according to Yadav Prakash, natural according to Yadav Prakash. Whereas, so Yadav Prakash's philosophy is very much like Nimbarka's. Nimbarka's called Swabhavika Beta Beta, natural difference and non-difference. So even without upadhi, Brahman has the capacity of becoming sentient and non-sentient things, right? So this is one of the qualities that they both agree that Brahman has qualities. So Yadav Prakash is saying here that Brahman has the quality of being able to become sentient and non-sentient beings. These two systems are called beta beta. That is beta and abeta, or difference and oneness. Because according to them, Brahman is both different from the jivas, the individual souls, and non-sentient objects, and at the same time, not different. So now criticism by Ramanuja of Shankara's Advaita. Against the first of these three views, Shankara's Advaita, those who have made a comprehensive study of the meaning of the Shrutis, Upanishads, adduce the following unanswerable objections. For instance, the word that, in that thou art, refers to Brahman as the subject treated in the context. The origin, sustenance, and dissolution of the world are said to arise from its will, from the Supreme Brahman's will, in such words as begin with, it willed to become many. So this is another Upanishadic statement. In the beginning there was one, and the one decided to become many. It willed to become many. And end with the world with all souls, praja, in it, my child, has its origin in Sat, or reality, or Brahman, its support and sustenance in Sat, reality or Brahman, and its dissolution in Sat, reality or Brahman. In other contexts, boundless, unsurpassed, and innumerable auspicious attributes like omniscience, omnipotence, the lordship of all, the attribute of having all things as its modes or prakaras, having neither equals nor superiors, the nature of one who has all the means of satisfying whatever is desired and whose purposes are forever realized, and the power of illuminating all things are predicated in the Shrutis, in the Upanishads, and likewise his being at variance with every form of imperfection, as in the words untouched by sin. And these are all given in the Shrutis, right? All these are adversely affected on this view of Advaita, right? All of these, contradict what the Advaitin has said, as it holds that Brahman is Brahman is without any difference or peculiarity or attribute, nirvishesha. Otherwise, we could say nirguna, without any qualities, but nirvishesha means without any particular attributes, any specialities. By way of answer, it might be said by the Advaitin, here's the Advaitin's answer to that attack. At the beginning of that context, in the Chandogya Upanishad, where we got that thou art, spoken by Swetaketu's father, it is declared that by knowing the one, all things are known. This implies that only the ultimate cause is true. The Shruti Upanishads then proceeds to explain how the cause alone is true and that all effects are false by giving the illustration of mud or clay, after which, in the passage, Sat, reality or Brahman alone, my child, exists at first, one and without a second, unquote. All difference is said to be non-existent, right? Because we have the idea of the clay and we have the pot, right? Or the dish or whatever is made out of the clay. But all of them are said to be clay only. All difference is said to be non-existent. Difference from like things and from unlike things. Other texts in different contexts which clarify the passage teach Brahmans being without any difference, particularity, or attribute. They are, and he also quotes, the Advaitam could also quote some verses, which are, of course, Abheda Shrutis, which speak about oneness. And these come from Taittiriya Upanishad and Taittiriya Aranyaka. And here they are. Brahman is truth, consciousness, infiniteness. Brahman is without parts, without action, without attributes, and without faults. Brahman is of the nature of consciousness and bliss, and the like. It is wrong to say, if many words are employed to signify the same object, as in truth, consciousness, and infiniteness, they would become synonymous and consequently tautological and unnecessary, right? So for though the object signified is only one, all these words are appropriate as they bring out Brahman's being opposed to every form of difference and particularity or attribute, Vishesha. So the note is, when the Shruti, when the Upanishads say Brahman is truth, consciousness, and infiniteness, the Advaitin explains its meaning thus. Brahman is other than untruth, right? It is not untruth, right? And that, or that which is unreal, right? It is other than, which is non-sentient. It is other than the finite. In other words, it's real, it's sentient, and it's infinite. These are three negative statements. You have double negatives there, right? Basically. So these three negative statements about a single entity and are not three different and positive attributes. That's what the Advaitin says. Okay. So the note about mud or clay. The illustration of mud or clay, when his father says, by knowing one, all things are known. Swetaketu does not understand how that could be. The father explains the statement with the illustration. He says, in the same way as everything is made of mud or clay is understood by a single lump of mud or clay, out of which the others are made, the teacher elaborates the point by adding the effects arising from mud or clay are only words and names. Only the clay, the mud or clay, is real. This is the Advaitic interpretation of the text and is brought in to justify the view that only the primal cause, Sat, is true or real, and that all the effects which appear thereon are mere names and appearances which are illusory. Ramanuja's interpretation of the text will be found elsewhere. So, how does Ramanuja react to that? The Advaitin saying all that. This is not a proper answer. According to this view, Advaita, since everything is illusory or mithya, there is nothing else that requires to be known. It cannot then be proved that all things are known by knowing the one. If the meaning of all things are known by the knowledge of the one, that is Brahman, is that since they and the one are of the same nature, then the one is known. The rest are also known. It will have to be admitted either that Brahman and the world, its effects, are both real, or that they are both unreal. On the view held by us, that is what Ramanuja says, that everything in the world has Brahman as its innermost soul, it would be easy to understand how by knowing the one, everything else is known. So, note here, Ramanuja's view is this: the world has Brahman as its soul and is therefore an attribute, Visheshana, of Brahman, right? The world and the souls are attributes, Visheshas, of Brahman. So when Brahman is known, everything else is known, because Brahman is the substantive, or the let's say the underlying principle, the substratum, of which everything else is an attribute. So Brahman is the thing, and everything else is an attribute of that thing. The substantive being the same in both cases. When the one is known, the others are known as well. This is the meaning of the Shruti. The father said to Swetaketu, "You are puffed up with pride. Did you at all ask about that Adesha? You seem elated as if you knew everything. Did you ask about that Adesha? Adesha is one by whom everything is ruled. Adesha means prashasanam, rule of or government, as in the text. It is in accordance with the rulership of this akshara. It is in accordance with the rulership of this akshara, Brahman, O Gargi, that the sun and the moon receive their support. Manu uses the word in the same sense. Prashashistaram Saveshwaram, the ruler over all. Here too, after declaring by the word one that Brahman is the material cause of the world, the idea that he alone is the ruler of the world is brought out by the word advitiya, without a second, which denies the existence of any other ruler. So, what was said by Swetaketu's father means, did you ask about the one who rules the universe and who is thinking, who is also its material cause? It is by hearing about him, by thinking about him, by knowing him, all other things that have not been heard of, thought of, or known, become heard of, thought of, and known. The idea in the mind of the father is this, and these quotations that we have up here are quoted from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 589 and Manusmriti 12:122. So the idea in the mind of the father of Swetaketu, in the Chandogya Upanishad, is this: have you learned from your teachers about Brahman, who is the ultimate cause of such things as origin, the welfare, and the dissolution of the whole world, who is also omniscient, all-knowing, and has always all objects of desire, and who is the ocean of infinite and noble attributes? So Adesha, the word Adesha. Shankara looks upon this word as synonymous with Upadesha, or teaching, and that which is taught. It means, according to him, Brahman, the supreme, the subject matter of instruction, and not Brahman, who is the ruler. If the latter interpretation were accepted, it would imply that Brahman has attributes, so he rejects it. Okay, so there's a different interpretation on the word Adesha by Shankara and Ramanuja. Yeah, Upadesha, but Upadesha also is, Upadesha also, Upadesha means teaching. If there's teaching means there has to be a teacher, and there has to be somebody taught, and there has to be a process of teaching. So again, it doesn't make any difference that Shankara rejects the meaning of Adesha as Upadesha, because it can mean this. It still means that there are attributes in Brahman. So the cause itself is called the effect. when it assumes varied and peculiar configurations, samsthana. Therefore, since Brahman is the cause of all, by knowing Brahman, the cause, which has for its body sentient and non-sentient things in their subtle state, the whole world, which is the effect, becomes known. Having this truth in mind, the father said to his son, "Do you ask about that by hearing of which everything is heard of, by thinking of which everything is thought of, and by knowing which everything is known?" The son does not understand what is in the father's mind, namely, that all these things have the same one cause. He thinks that when two things are different from each other, it is not possible that to know one of them by knowing the other. So he asks, "Of what nature, Reverend Sir," to his father, "is that adesha?" Adesa. The father, being urged in this way, proceeds to explain the idea in his mind. This idea may be stated as follows. The supreme Brahman, who is characterized by consciousness, bliss, and freedom from all imperfections, whose magnificence is infinite, who is possessed of infinite, unsurpassed, and innumerable collections of attributes, including omnipotence, or powerfulness, satya sankalpatva, right, which literally means that whatever his vow is, whatever his desire is, it comes true, and who is ever the same without change or modification, avikari. Vikari means modification or change, so the supreme is avikari, without change, has for his body sentient and non-sentient things, and by his leela or sportful activity, and by his will assumes in a part or portion, amsa, of himself, the configuration of the world with its countless and varied forms, consisting of things that move and things that do not move, meaning sentience and non-sentience. Hence, by knowing him, Brahman, all the rest is known. He explains, with the help of an example, what is seen in the world of everyday life, that is, that the effect is none other than the cause. Note, according to Vishishtadvaita, the philosophy of Ramanuja, the world is the body of Brahman. It may be asked what is meant here by the body. The body should not be defined as the seat of movement and of the senses. That substance which is invariably supported and controlled by another, and which exists to serve the purposes of that other, is the body of that other substance. That is Ramanuja's definition of what body means. That which is invariably, the soul invariably supports, right, and controls the body, and the body exists for the purpose of the soul. That's basically the point. In this sense, the world of inanimate matter and souls of sentient beings are the body of the Supreme Lord, in that sense. In himself, there is no change or modification, vikara. Changes or modifications occur only in his body as a result of his will. In the same way as by knowing a single lump of mud or clay, my dear, all things made of mud or clay would be known in order to become fit for the interchange of thoughts in words, modifications, and names are attained by mud. In order to become fit for the interchange of thoughts in words, modifications, and names are attained by mud or clay. The truth is that they are all mud or clay. The meaning of the Shruti is as follows. The same substance, mud or clay, attains modifications which are of the nature of varied configurations and states, such as pots and dishes, and acquires also varied names, right? So we just said pots and dishes. But since all these states are only particular configurations of mud or clay, it is only the substance mud or clay that exists in these forms and not any other substance. In the same way, as by knowing a lump of mud or clay, its modifications like dishes, which are only particular configurations, therefore become known. This is the meaning. So this is what Swetaketa's father told him. Thereafter, the son, who does not know how Brahman is the sole cause of the whole world, says, Reverend Sir, kindly explain this to me. In order to show that Brahman, who is omniscient and omnipotent, is alone the cause of all, the father says, this was at first, my dear, only Sat, only one without a second, right? So talking about creation, right? When Swetaketa asked his father about, well, okay, so explain to me about creation. So he says in the beginning, right? He says, at first, my dear, only Sat, there was only Sat, only one without a second. And that's a quotation from Chandogya Upanishad 6.1.4, right? Because all of this is between Swetaketa and his father is from Chandogya Upanishad. So in this passage, this refers to the world. All this was at first, my dear, only Sat, only one without a second. This refers to the world. At first means before creation. By the words, only Sat, the truth that the world existed in the form of Sat, its cause, is brought out. Even during creation, it is likewise in the form of Sat, or the truth, right? Its cause. But before creation, the world existed as Sat, could not be distinguished by names and forms. Remember we discussed this before, that before the creation of the world with the souls, and all the souls were inhabiting different bodies, and the world was evolved into different elements, through the process of evolution, right? From gross to subtle, from subtle to gross, excuse me. Okay, and then in the pralaya, in the time of dissolution, all of that came together. The souls were in Sushupti, right? Were in deep sleep, right? And they were practically indistinguishable, and matter was also indistinguishable. It was all one sort of what we call pradhana, or a conglomerate of different elements. So nothing was indistinguishable at that time, right? So that was the point. That's the point of saying it's all one. It was all like one, right? Actually, it's never always one, but after the pralaya and before the next creation, it appears to be one. So here we have the explanation again. From this explanation itself, but before creation, the world existing as Sat could not be distinguished by names and forms, couldn't distinguish them. From this explanation itself, it is clear that Sat is the material cause, the Upadana Karana. Not just the potter, but also the clay. Brahman is not only the potter, the Nimitta Karana, the efficient cause, but also the clay, the mud, which he makes the pot out of, and the dishes and whatever. The word advitiya, without second, in this statement, right, explains how Brahman alone is the instrumental or operative cause, the Nimitta Karana, the potter who takes the clay, which is himself, and creates the universe of matter and living beings, and denies the existence of any Nimitta Karana, any other cause other than Brahman, right? So now Madhva and all the Vedanta acharyas, all the personalist Vaishnava acharyas like that, they all agree, everybody agrees that Brahman is the efficient cause, is the potter, right? Is the maker of everything, creates everything in that sense. But they don't always agree. Madhva doesn't agree that Brahman creates the world and the souls out of himself. That he is not the clay, he is only the potter, right? That's what Madhva believes. And so here, clearly, Ramanuja also gives the explanation of this section of Chandogya Upanishad, which also defeats Dvaita Vedanta in that sense. So note, in the case of the pot, mud or clay is called the material cause, and the potter is the instrumental cause, right? That's what I said. So The thought in his mind that the one who governs or controls is also the material cause, upadankarana, as implied in the question put at the very beginning. What is that question again? Did you ask about that adesh by hearing of which everything else is unheard of becomes heard of? This thought he now explains very clearly. Sat, which is itself the material cause and the instrumental cause, willed as follows, right? So now we're understanding why Swetaketu's father uses this term adesh, right? In the sense of the ruler, the one who governs or controls, and not, as Shankara says, upadesh. I will become many. I will be born as many. Chandogya Upanishad 6.2.3. The Supreme Brahman himself, who is referred to by the word Sat, right, or reality, who is omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipotent, all-powerful, and whose purpose is ever realized, will to become the world with all its diverse and countless beings, sentient and non-sentient, saying, I will become the many, and for that purpose, be born as many. Though he has all objects that may be desired, he willed so for his sport. Yeah, some people think, well, why did he do that? Why did the Supreme do that? Having so determined, he created from a fragment of a part of his, namely his body, which is an attribute of his, the elements beginning with ether, the most subtle, akasha. Again, the same supreme deity denoted by the word sat, or reality, willed as follows: lo, I will enter into three deities with my body, that is, the individual self, and endow them with names and forms. The Shruti explains that the individual self, which is my body, that the individual self has Brahman as its soul. It further shows that all non-sentient things, achit, right, like matter, become entities only owing to the entrance into them of the individual self, which has Brahman as its soul, and that only all things that are of this description, achit, acquire names and forms. Okay, a few notes here. These three deities spoken about here are three elements, right? Ether, air, and fire. The three elements are called deities here. Water and earth are also referred to by implication. Note, non-sentient things have, according to Vishishta Dvaita, an element of chit, or consciousness, which is extremely small, a fragment part of his. Before creation, Brahman existed with sentient and non-sentient things, chit and achit, in their subtle state, when they could not be distinguished by names and forms. In creation, the substantive part, or vishishya amsa, or swarupa of Brahman, creates by its will from out of the attributive part, visheshana amsa, namely his body consisting of subtle chit and achit, the grosser forms of animate and inanimate things, which we now see as the world. What changes or undergoes modifications is the body, or the attributive part of Brahman, and not its swarupa, its substantive part, right? It's the substratum, which is unchanging, or nirvikara. He says nirvikara here. Avikara can be avikara or nirvikara. Without nirvikara means without change. Avikara means not having any change. What has been said so far means this: the individual self, jivatman, being the body of Brahman, is an attribute or mode, prakara, of his, and has Brahman as its soul, as is declared in another Shruti, right? Remember, Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, the Antaryami Brahmana. right? He whose body is the self, Jivatma, that's the quote. Things which have the configurations of gods, men, and the like, being the bodies of the individual self, are its modes or attributes, are Brahman's modes or attributes. And for that reason, all these have Brahman as their soul. Therefore, all words in familiar use in this world as denoting things which are formed by the combination of the root prakriti, the mula pradhana, right, the conglomerate of all material elements, and the termination, all words such as God, men, yakshas, rakshas, cow, deer, bird, tree, creeper, wood, stone, grass, pot, cloth, etc., denote through the things which have the respective configurations implied as their signification, both the individual self presiding over it and the supreme self, which is the soul of the individual self. According to Ramanuja, when we say Vedartha, this is the name of somebody, Vedartha, we mean not only the bodily configuration of Vedartha, his body, both subtle and gross, right? But also the self or the soul of Vedartha, right? When we talk about somebody, we say, oh, there's Vedartha. So we're talking about his body, we're talking about his mind, his gross and subtle body. We're also saying his soul is there, Vedartha, right? So we're talking about the mind-body complex with the soul. Then, and likewise also, we're talking about not only Vedartha, but within Vedartha's body is the soul, within Vedartha's soul is another soul, is the supreme soul. Supreme is within, is the soul of Vedartha's soul. So likewise also the supreme self, who is the soul of Vedartha's soul, which is its body, right? So the supreme's body is the soul of Vedartha and his body, right? That's also his body. That's the supreme's body, right? Thus, the world that consists of all the sentient and non-sentient things has Sat or reality as its material cause. Material cause means the material it's made of. And Sat as its instrumental cause, right? That is called, material cause is Upadan Karna, and the instrumental cause is Nimitta Karna. Nimitta Karna means Sat as Sat, the supreme Brahman is the one that created it. So he's the creator and he's also the creation. Likewise, it has Sat as its support, Adhara, because remember, that's how Ramanuja describes the body and the soul relationship. The soul supports the body, right? So the body in this case is all living beings and the universe. The supreme Brahman, Sriman Narayana, supports them. It is Sat is its support, Adhara, and is governed by Sat. It also controls them, right? And right? So Sat, or the supreme Brahman, Sriman Narayana, also governs them, right? As we saw that word Adesh before. So it is governed by Sat and exists to subserve the purposes of Sat. That is the third part of the definition of what a soul is compared to a body. That body serves the soul. That means the universe of matter and sentient and insentient and Jivatman souls, right, is meant to serve the supreme Brahman, Sriman Narayana, or here called Sat. Right, Sat exists to subserve the purposes of Sat. All this and the like are explained at length in the Shrutis or the Upanishads. Like there's some other Upanishads which explain this. These beings, prajas, right, all beings. Now, what does it mean by beings? It means Sat and the sentient and insentient beings in this world, right? So they're called prajas, right? Arise, right? Comes from the word what ja means to take birth, and pra is a prefix. So prajas means that which is those which have taken birth. So strictly speaking, means the sentient beings, right? These beings, my dear, arise. My dear, these beings arise, my dear, from Sat, reality, their origin, and have their being in Sat, and are ultimately absorbed into Sat, right? Which reminds us of the Taittiriya Upanishad, right? This is actually a quote from Chandogya Upanishad 686, but it also reminds us of that definition in Taittiriya Upanishad that Brahman is that from which everything emanates, that by which everything is maintained, and that into which everything enters. Yatova imani bhutani jayante yena jatani jivanti yat prayanti abhisham vishanti, right? So that is also given here in a slightly different form in Chandogya Upanishad 686. Having established this, by such means as the relationship between cause and effect, the Shruti or the Upanishads say, all this has this Brahman as its soul, and that alone is real or satyam, truth. That quotation points out that Brahman, having the soul of being the soul of the whole world, is alone true. Having declared that he, the Supreme Brahman alone, is the soul of the whole world, and that the whole world is his body, the Shruti concludes that the application of general truth established before, that all things have Brahman as their soul, to the case of a particular individual self, namely Swetaketu, by saying that thou art, therefore this mode or individual self, signified by the word thou, is also Brahman, right? So because of this whole discussion here, we understand that thou art, that means the Supreme Brahman, who is the creator, maintainer, and dissolution force of the universe, right, is also the soul of Swetaketu's soul. He is the inner dweller, the antaryamin of Swetaketu. And in other words, that and thou are both mean the Supreme Brahman, in that thou art. What has been said means, right? Therefore, this mode or individual self signified by thou is also Brahman. What has been said means thus, this. When it is said, quote, all this has this as its soul, by the phrase all this, the world consisting of sentient and non-sentient things is referred to. And it is declared by the Shruti that this world, that is, this or Brahman, is the soul. In relation to the world, Brahman is explained to be the soul. This is the meaning. We should consider what exactly is meant by Brahmatmakatvam, or having Brahman as its Atma or soul, right? Is it because of the relationship that exists between soul and body, or is it identity of nature? If it is said that it is due to identity of the whole world and Brahman, that the qualities of Brahman implied in the beginning, such as ever realized purpose or will, in the text, it willed that it would become the many and be born, would become and would be born, would become contradicted or sublated. That the world has Brahman as its soul owing to the relationship between the two of body and soul is understood specifically from another Shruti, from another part of the Upanishads, that is, having entered within as the ruler, he is the soul of all persons. And the note here is contradicted. Okay, so contradicted because neither non-sentient things nor sentient things in the world have such qualities, right? So exact identity is not what is meant here, right? Entered within as the ruler, he is the soul of all persons. From this, it is specifically understood that Brahman is the soul or self of all, that he is the soul of all persons, and that everything is his body. Further, that there is another Shruti which says, he who stands in the soul of the jiva and is within the soul, and of whom the soul is not aware, and to whom the soul is the body, and who controls the soul, he is your soul, the inner ruler, who is immortal. And this comes from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Antaryami Brahmana. Right. So here, in the present context, right? What's the present context? We're talking about Tattvamasi, particularly from Chandogya Upanishad. Here in the present context, also, by the phrase, by means of the individual self who is my body, the same is meant as has already been stated. Therefore, since all sentient and non-sentient things are the body of Brahman, Brahman, who has everything as for his body and everything as his attribute, prakara, is also signified by all words. By all words, right? So if we say fire, it means Brahman. If we say Vedartha, it means Brahman. If we say Swetaketu, it means Brahman, right? So by all words. That art thou, by this coordination, only Brahman, which has the individual self as its body, and likewise the individual self as its attribute, is signified. When it is stated in this manner, this is understood to be the purport. He, that is, the individual self, who is at first understood from the word thou, as the presiding spirit of the body, is himself the body of the Supreme Self and the attribute of the Supreme Self. And he is sustained by the Supreme Self and is unable to exist or act apart from the Supreme Self. Hence, the word thou signifies the inner ruler who has thee, or you, as his attribute. In the Shruti, quote, I will enter through the individual self who is my body and endow all things with names and forms, unquote. The individual self who has a body of his own acquires his name only by being the body of Brahman, right? Just like I acquire my name only because my body only acquires a name because my soul has a name. So all bodies and all sentient things and all insentient things acquire names only because they have an inner controller, that is Brahman. And similarly, when the primary name, therefore, of everything, every primary name means Brahman. In the coordination or grammatical apposition, samanyadikaranya, between that and thou, in that thou art, the two words refer only to Brahman. Of the two, the word that signifies Brahman, the ultimate cause of the world, the treasure house of all auspicious qualities, free from all imperfections and changeless. The word thou refers to the same Brahman who has the individual self, which is his body, as his attribute by being the inner ruler of the individual self. Thus, the two words, that and thou, refer to the same Brahman by the difference in their meanings. Just like we talked about Janaka the king. Janaka is the king, right? The words have different meanings, but they refer to the same entity. Brahman being free from imperfection and from all change or modification, his being the treasure house of all auspicious qualities and his being the cause of the world are not contradicted or affected in any way. Note, coordination or samanyadikaranya, right? Shankara holds that the coordination in that thou art means only identity or oneness of the jiva and Brahman. Ramanuja, however, contends that there is coordination and grammatical apposition only when the two words having different meanings apply to the same thing and not when they signify pure identity, their identity, right? Blank identity. Those persons who have not studied Vedanta do not realize that all non-sentient things and all individual selves have Brahman as their soul. They think that the signification of all words is confined only to the respective objects, which are only a portion of what is expressible by them. Right? Because we talked about Swetaketu is not only the body-mind Swetaketu, is not only the soul of Swetaketu, but is the soul of Swetaketu, with the Antaryami or the Paramatman, the supreme Brahman who inhabits the soul of Swetaketu as his body. So those who have studied Vedanta are, on the other hand, aware, as the result of their study of Vedantic texts, that since all things are created out of Brahman and have Brahman as their inner ruler, they have Brahman as their soul, and that all words signify Brahman who has all things as his modes or attributes prakara.
Om Namo Narayanaye. Om Namo Narayanaye.